Hello, everyone. I am pleased to welcome UVA alumni, parents, and friends here today to the business of sports at this stage in the game. This event represents a collaboration between the UVA Office of Engagement, the School of Engineering and Applied Science, the Darden School of Business, and the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. Before we begin, I want to note that this event will be recorded. If you have questions you'd like to submit to the panelists, you may use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. Our panelists will try to answer as many questions as possible after the main discussion. My name is Gabrielle Adams, and I'm an assistant professor at the Batten School, and I'm the director of the school's executive education and lifelong learning programs. I'm a California native, and I come to UVA by way of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, London Business School, and Harvard University. I research the social psychology of leadership, interpersonal dynamics, and social justice, and I sit on the board of several technology companies. And at this time, I would like to invite both of our panelists to turn their cameras on for introductions. So today we welcome Jonathan Becher, president of Sharks Sports and Entertainment, the parent organization of the NHL's San Jose Sharks hockey team and 3 ice sport facilities in Silicon Valley. Prior to this, Jonathan spent a decade at SAP in a variety of senior roles, including chief marketing officer and chief digital officer. A 3-time CEO, Becher writes the popular blog Managed by Walking Around and is a frequent speaker at technology industry events. Forbes magazine and other national outlets have named him to their lists of the world's most influential CMOs. He is the board chair for the Churchill Club and serves on the boards of Trintech, Pixley, and Khoros. He graduated from UVA with a BS in computer engineering. Please also welcome Jake Burns, the Executive Vice President of Business Operations for the Washington Nationals. Jake oversees all revenue and marketing, including ticket sales and operations, corporate partnerships, strategy and analytics, ballpark events, marketing, and game day entertainment. Prior to joining the Nationals, Jake spent 14 years in organizational and human capital strategy consulting. He led a team of more than 40 staff who helped clients envision, design, and implement major organizational transformations. Jake has a BS in systems engineering and an MBA from the University of Virginia's Darden Business School. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us here today. So what I'd like to do is start off with a few questions that we have prepared, and then we'll open the floor up for other questions. So first for Jake, we're going to talk about the business of sports here today, but I'd love to hear how both of you, you in particular, found your way to working in such influential roles for large sports organizations and how your engineering and business backgrounds prepared you.
Well, first, thank you for having me, Gabrielle. I'm very excited to be here and have such an esteemed partner to be able to do this panel with. But yeah, I mean, you know, I've got a little bit of a unique background for our industry. As you mentioned, I had an engineering degree from UVA, and I spent 3 or 4 years actually doing aerospace engineering work for the Department of Defense. And then, you know, decided that I wanted to use my engineering skills in a bit different capacity and pursue my passion in sports. Was lucky enough to have a lot of great contacts in the industry through a variety of different organizations that I'd participated in, and got some great counsel to go back and get my MBA. And I loved Charlottesville so much that I went back to Darden, spent a couple of great years back in Charlottesville. While I was there, I was able to go up to New York and spend some time interning in the NBA's team marketing and business operations group that worked directly for David Stern. So really had the unique experience of, you know, getting access and exposure to David Stern and Scott O'Neill and some of the great, you know, leaders and minds in our industry. When I graduated, I just had some realities about graduating with business school loans and being recently married, and decided to sort of continue in the consulting path where I worked for Booz Allen for 8 or 9 years. You know, while I was there, I certainly maintained my network, and when the opportunity with the Nationals presented itself, I definitely jumped at it. But I think having come from outside of the industry and, you know, both from an engineering perspective, from a business school perspective, and from a consulting perspective, you know, I think all of those different stops in my career really taught me how to be a business leader, taught me how to frame and analyze a problem, how to communicate clearly and concisely, and most importantly, how to network and build relationships. And I think, if you're going to be a business leader in any industry, the ability to, communicate clearly, the ability to develop meaningful relationships, and really just having a work ethic that enables you to, sort of put in that extra work to get to where you want to be. I think most people can be successful. So, again, really the ability to kind of analyze and think through a problem, the ability to communicate, and, the ability to network.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing. We're going to come back to this question later on about how you sort of broke into the industry and advice you might have for people who'd like to follow in your footsteps. Let me ask Jonathan the same question. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about how you broke in.
Well, maybe there's something about UVA that we're non-traditional, because I also have a non-traditional background for the sports industry. I mean, I sometimes say, when you're a little kid, some kids say, I want to be a doctor or a firefighter or an astronaut. I wasn't the kid that said, I'm going to grow up and run a sports franchise. That wasn't the talk I gave as a little kid. In fact, in a very real sense, this is my fourth career. I started out as a software developer, BS in computer science from UVA. And then I became an entrepreneurial, started 3 software startups here in Silicon Valley, and then later became a global marketer, as you introduced. And those careers sound very different. But the one thing I always had in common, those, it was always grounded in at least what now is called customer experience, trying to figure out how to think outside in rather than inside out. I saw that Jake has a systems engineering background. Systems teaches you a lot of how to think systematically, hopefully from an external perspective, not just an internal one. And as I look back on that career, software development really taught me how to think critically about problems, to separate the noise from the actual essence of the problem. Entrepreneurialism taught me about experimentation. Sometimes in sports, we look too much backwards in history and records, and we don't recognize that sports as an industry is changing rapidly as well. And entrepreneurial gave me that experimentation gene, if you will. And marketing taught me how to distill complicated topics to its essence. I think the end about all this is every time in my career, and I don't know that I really realized it till later in my career, when I was forced to choose about whether I wanted to be broad or deep, I always went broad. And I always pushed myself into areas that I had no idea how to do. I mean, let's be honest, when I accepted this job as a president of a sports entertainment franchise, you could argue I had no background to do this job. And so I'm glad that my boss, the owner, took a challenge but pushing yourself in directions you can't go is a part of my DNA, I'd say.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think, we're all certainly being pushed in novel directions on the back of the coronavirus pandemic. And your discussion about problem solving and experimentation, I'd love to carry that thread to the next question, which is about how the global pandemic, which has obviously affected all industries, but of course, major sports organizations, have basically resulted in some very large operational shifts during this time. So Jonathan, what are some of the largest challenges that you've faced operationally, and how are you addressing those?
Well, I mean, the simple throwaway answer is we were closed for all events for 11 months. We only reopened for without spectators 2 weeks ago. And so from March 11th to essentially January to February 13th, no events. So there's no operations. But I think a little more subtly than that, the biggest changes, and I suspect Jake's biggest changes were also cultural, right? I spent most of my career at tech companies. At tech companies, you're used to work from anywhere, work from home, you have employees across the globe, or at least in many cities in the US. We're in the business of live events. And so the idea that a live event doesn't take place at the venue itself is a bit foreign for our industry. And we weren't built that way. Many of our systems didn't even allow remote access. So if you're a technologist, we actually had to rapidly move things from on-premise to the cloud, right? We didn't even know how to hold an all hands meeting where everybody wasn't gathered into one venue. I mean, it seems silly, but Zoom was one of our biggest corporate partners, but we hadn't built it into our DNA. We have, of course, now, like everybody else has. So we talked a lot about the move to simulated games and that people want to do e-gaming, but we hadn't done it ourselves. And so now we've learned about Twitch and how all that works. But I think in the end, the biggest change is we were pretty traditional when it came to management practices. We spent time with employees face to face, and that's how we managed. We've had to learn how to deal with remote management. Luckily, it's a skill I had because I grew up in the tech world, but most people didn't. They grew up in the business of sports where you've always managed somebody right in front of you because that's the business of live events. And that's been the biggest operational challenge, how to do that when people are juggling kids who aren't in school, second jobs, et cetera. I'm pretty pleased. I think we've acted better than I thought we would have, but it's a strain on the organization.
I can only imagine. Jake?
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I mean, having come out of the consulting industry where we had work where you live models and, we were used to remote working and holding meetings remotely, going into a live entertainment industry where everything happens at the ballpark, being able to all of a sudden stand up your business in a virtual way is very challenging. And then, just managing and leading through that. I remember when I was in consulting and, we went to a sort of more remote or work where you live model, one of the biggest challenges when you're not, surrounded by your coworkers and talking and engaging with other human beings is the mental health aspect of all of it. And so, being able to keep folks positive and focused on your objective is very difficult when you're not, everybody's spread apart and you're only seeing people on Zoom meetings like this. I think I would also say just the uncertainty of all of this. We're essentially hosting a party the size of the city of Charlottesville, 81 nights a year. And there's a ton of planning that goes into doing that, just operationally, it's like operating a small city. And, not knowing, if and when we're going to have fans or, when the virus is going to, when cases are going to start to decrease and everyone's going to feel comfortable, you have to make real business decisions to plan to be able to open and operate, a venue of our size. And so, managing through ambiguity and uncertainty becomes very, very challenging. I think that's where having some experience in working with the Department of Defense and the military, where they kind of teach you to just make a decision based on the information that you have at your disposal. And then when new information presents itself, make a decision based on that information. I think it's a very valuable lesson that's hopefully helped us very well in this, during this time.
If I could just follow that thread. So certainly managing uncertainty, a lot of that times that means that you have to improvise. And I'm curious about what changes or improvisations you've made during this time, either internally or externally facing, that you think will sort of persist into the future as standard operating procedures from this point on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at a very core level, sports as an industry is really starting to recognize the importance of technology solutions for our business. I think fans are going to increasingly expect a personalized and streamlined experience in all of their engagements with our club. I think, that means kind of having one experience when I come to the ballpark, right? Where sports teams, I think historically, maybe operate a little bit according to their core business lines and maybe in a siloed way as it relates to like ticketing and concessions and retail. I think our organization has always kind of been at the forefront and been, an innovator in the technology space as it relates to sports. We were the first to offer digital ticketing, cloud-based commerce, and contactless ticketing in the World Series. We also have the largest loyalty platform in Major League Baseball. As we look to the future, I think you're going to see data and automation are going to be core to our next generation strategy. We're going to look to integrate all of our disparate data sources and leverage advanced analytics to drive experiences and offers that are tailored to our fans' individual tastes and needs. I want to know that when you come to the ballpark, it's your birthday and that you like Nats dogs, and be able to serve you with an offer that, gives you a free Nats dog and discount at the team store for being such a great fan. But, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built up to be able to do that. And we also have to have the sort of platforms and capabilities in place to be able to enable that data collection. So I think one big area that you'll see change is in the concession space. We'll be introducing mobile ordering for the first time. So when you come to the ballpark, you'll be able to, order your concessions on your phone and then go and pick it up. We'll be able to capture fans' data and sort of feed our one view of our fan to be able to start to analyze that and hopefully create more tailored experiences in the future.
Thanks. And Jonathan, I know the NHL, obviously different season, different time frame. So you, in some ways, I think you have a little bit of an opportunity to learn from, other major sports franchises that have had to go ahead of you. On the other hand, you've sort of had to be at the forefront of a lot of those changes. What do you see persisting into the future? I know you have a technology background, so I expect maybe that's informed a lot of your thinking here.
Yeah, I think technology is somehow the easy answer, and I'm in the happy accent or the good fortune that, I'm in a tech center, Silicon Valley. I've got a tech background. My owner is a tech exec. And so technology has never really been our impediment. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, technology has always been an add-on. It's never been the core. And I think the question that people are recognizing to ask themselves now, and we're doing a better job of being honest about, is digital or technology the second thing or the first thing? How do you adopt, I like to call it a digital first mindset? And I'll give you two very simple examples, right? In premium spaces, whether they're suites or et cetera, the industry of sports and entertainment has always said, get people around. It's a high touch B2B style sales model, and bring people down, let them see your ballpark, your arena, let them experience the product, et cetera. But it's a high friction. And if you think in other industries like retail, right, we want to be frictionless or friction light at least. And so the question is, how do you adopt a frictionless less people in an industry that's built on, no, it's a person to person business. And so digitization first is the flip. It's an afterthought right now for most orgs and making it the primary thing. And as a second way to kind of push that even more in the future and maybe even freak people out, the reality is that our businesses have always been the product on the pitch, on the field, on the ice, et cetera, first, and secondarily, everybody outside of it. And the everybody outside of it is usually been broadcast, right? That's the word, which means they get the same experience. But I'm guessing Jake has 100 times more fans that never get to the ballpark than are in the ballpark, maybe 100, 500 times more fans. Same with us, right? We have millions of people that identify with our brand. Most of them will never get to the ballpark, to the arena in their entire life, or maybe they get to go once or twice a year. And what we're starting to play with is, have we designed our business backwards? Because the business is built for the product in the building, and maybe the business should be built for the million people that aren't in the building first, and then secondarily for what's in there. And that's sacrilege to traditionalists who want to talk about in-arena experience, but I'm starting to push the out-arena experience as the primary vector. We'll see where it goes, but if you believe in experimental mindset, which I do, then you got to try. And if it doesn't work, great, you do something else.
Thank you for sharing. I'd like to pivot now to talk about a major social cause, a major national conversation happening. We've been talking a lot about fans, players being at the center of what you do. Currently, the Black Lives Matter movement is becoming more synonymous with sports as athletes and organizations are using their platforms to affect change. And as we work toward a more equitable future and we envision what that looks like, how do these causes affect your leadership, both in terms of day-to-day decision-making and long-term focus? So how are you and your organizations embracing diversity as a value? Why don't we start with Jonathan there?
Okay, well, maybe I'll start with a personal answer and then go to the organizational answer. I grew up in a small town in Virginia that even to this day has about equal numbers of Black and white. And frankly, if I'm blunt, it was a fair amount of tension in the town where I grew up until the first Black mayor got elected in the 80s. And while that wasn't a magical moment that turned into a kumbaya, it did fundamentally change that town. But let's be honest, if I'm blunt here, it's distressing to me how our organization, our company, our country, frankly, the world has made so little progress in dealing with social injustice over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So as proud as I am as our organizational history on D&I, we're in a sport that if we're honest, the vast majority of the players are white. It's unusual to see a player of color in our sport, although we're in a community where it's culturally diverse. We may be the most culturally diverse area in North America here in Silicon Valley. And so I think we've done a good job over the years of the core of our brand is called Teal Together, which is as a community, we need to come together regardless of our background, whether you've ever skated on ice before, whether you grew up or not. We've, I'd say, done an excellent job of courting the Hispanic Latinx community. We even have a brand called Los Tiburones. You might actually be able to see a hat behind me, which is culturally there. We've done some pretty good work in the South Asian audience, et cetera. But to be fair, our own organization is not culturally enough diverse. If you look at the leadership team, we're still mostly white males, as a lot of professional sports are. And so we've had a number of really uncomfortable conversations. And frankly, the thing I'm most proud of is back in probably April of last year, a group of 12 employees founded something called Teal for Change. And they took it upon themselves. Turns out I'm now their sponsor, but they started without my input, of saying, we're going to change not just this org, but the local community, the sport of hockey. We're going to try to take on the world. Seems ridiculous, I know, but I'm a big believer in BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goal. This is clearly that. And we've done some small things, which will turn into big things. We've fixed the dress code for part-time workers, so it's more inclusive. We've changed the code of conduct, so it's zero tolerance for anything that is discriminatory. We've actually changed our recruiting practices so that we're looking in different pools, et cetera. It's the beginning of a journey, but I like to remind people the small steps will make big progress over time. We just have to keep pushing. So we're not there. If this is a hockey game, we're still early in the first period, but I like the fact that we've changed the style of play.
Thanks. And Jake, what's happening over at the Nats?
I mean, I think Jonathan said it extremely well, and I would feel very similarly. I think as an organization, we always strive to promote diversity and welcome different voices and opinions to the decision-making table. If this past year has really highlighted anything, it's that our country still has a long ways to go when it comes to promoting diversity and inclusion. And it's provided really time for us to reflect on where we are as an organization, and where we can be better. It's, particularly hits home for us being in the nation's capital. And we felt the impact of this past summer's protests and felt that, we as an organization could be a catalyst to help bring about change. That change is going to take time, to Jonathan's point. It's going to be small steps along the way. But we've embarked on a journey to encourage and facilitate that really difficult dialogue and try and institute meaningful changes in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Each step in our journey is going to be towards sustainable change, and it's going to be rooted in thoughtful discussion and careful planning. We didn't, I'll be honest, we didn't have a DEI committee before this, before last summer. And since then, we've stood one up, and it's comprised of Nationals employees from across the organization. They've worked hard to put together a DEI strategy that outlines sort of 3 core pillars or areas that we're going to focus on in creating change. The first is going to be through our external business and partnerships. The second will be through our community work and internally in our own organization and culture. And then the third is going to be around, the fan experience and how we can make that more inclusive. We've actually been able to bring some great speakers in and hosted several virtual workshops here over the last few months for employees to kind of grapple with inequality and address some very difficult to discuss questions. We've launched a monthly DEI resource guide that we share across the organization. And we've actively sought recommendations, insights, and opinions for ways that we can, address systemic inequities. That said, it's all still very early for us, and we know that's going to take a long time to enact change. But we're excited about the steps that we've started to take and the commitment that we have across the organization, all the way from our ownership, down to every employee. And, I think we're going to make significant progress, but it's going to be step progress. And, it's good that the conversation is now very real and happening.
Thank you both for sharing. It's an issue that I know is really at the forefront of national conversation right now. It's also an issue that I've been doing some of my own work on. It's interesting to hear kind of industry specific and team specific examples of steps that you're taking. I know it's a long road that we have ahead of us, but I'm glad that the national conversation is turned in this manner. It feels like a momentous time right now. I'd like to pivot again. There are so many questions to cover here. To talk to you a little bit about just management and leadership styles. So that's my background as a leadership professor. My question for you is that in your current roles, you both have to interact with many stakeholders. So players, season ticket holders, coaching staff, who sometimes have competing interests, which can result in conflict or disagreement. To the extent that consensus is your aim, what is your approach to building consensus? So this is a question about your kind of personal management and leadership style. So we'll start with Jake on this one first, please.
Sure. I think a lot of my, the way that I approach it was informed by my time as a strategy and organization change consultant. I think really at the core is an ability to listen, to take the time to listen, to understand both audiences or however many audiences that you're trying to achieve consensus with, understand what their objectives are, understand what their positions are. And then, taking the time to try and find to be solution oriented and find a way to meet folks where they are. I think oftentimes we'll have a tendency, given the fast paced nature of our business, to just make a decision and move on and hope that everybody accepts it. I think, on some level that's necessary in any business, but in a situation where you're faced with a challenge where you've got very competing interests, you've got people that aren't on the same page, taking the time to listen, and understand where they are and be very solution oriented is going to help you hopefully build consensus. But then you've got to bring people together to talk, right? You've got to build relationships, not only between you and the person that you're speaking with, but between the people that might disagree. So, being able to kind of bridge that gap is incredibly important because, most decisions that we make, they impact every aspect of our organization. And, if our leaders aren't working together and we're not working together, then you're never going to build consensus and you're never going to get a true organization-wide solution.
Jonathan?
This is one of my favorite topics, and I'll start with a shameless plug, which is I write a ton about this. And if you're interested, you can go to jonathanbecher.com, read that Manage by Walking Around that was in the introduction. Sorry for the shameless plug, but, and I could easily talk for the next 6 hours about this. So I'll try to condense and go quickly. First of all, I'm not sure consensus is what we should be looking for. Yeah. We get too much consensus in the workplace. Consensus suggests that everyone agrees, which is not practical in most situations. And I don't even know if it's desirable. Going back to the diversity conversation, I worry that when you have too much consensus, it's because you have too many people with the same background that think the same. I want strongly divergent opinions. I want active disagreements without conflict. Hard on the issues, easy on the people is one of my management techniques. I want people listening, and I want people that have empathy with other people's point of view, even if they don't agree with other people's point of view. What I'm looking for the most, and I see it all the time, is people with confirmation bias, where they only see data that supports their own point of view. And the thing, we're all subject to it. I'm hardly perfect about it as well. My mental model on how to be more open-minded is I often, when I go into a situation, ask myself, what would change my opinion? Is there any data in the world that would change my opinion on a subject? And as soon as I come up with a theory of what would change my opinion, then all my effort pivots to try to find that data. Because if I told myself that would change my opinion, I need to be authentic and then search for it. I'll even ask other people to try to find that data to help change my opinion as well. There's so many stories here about how that could work. But if you want to oversimplify this, Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, had a technique he called the Feynman learning technique. I learned it actually at UVA a long time ago, and I find it a really nice way to make sure that I don't get stuck in biased blind spots, and that I'm open, and I actually bring people to exercise and say, okay, here's all our different points of view. I get it, you're never going to agree, but let's commit that this is what we're going to do together. Because the thing that I worry the most is public compliance and then private defiance. That's what I'm trying to avoid. That's, if you want to call it consensus, it's we've agreed to disagree. Here's what we're all going to do. Everyone nod. Yes. Now let's move forward as one team.
As a leadership professor and social psychologist, I couldn't agree more. The conversation that you were talking about earlier, the link between, I think, consensus and progress is really an interesting one, because it's not clear to me that consensus is always conducive to progress, right? And so it's interesting to hear your perspective on that, I think, because having national conversations, for example, right now around unity, it strikes me that we also need to be having national conversations about what is needed for people to want to move forward together, and have we met that minimum standard. So thank you for bringing the conversation full circle to that issue. Again, pivoting, I wanted to get in this question about sports betting. There's been a lot, this is a big pivot, but there's been a lot of talk, a lot of legal changes in your industry right now around sports betting. It's now legal in more than a few US states. I'm interested in how you and your organizations are thinking about that policy change, and how you see that changing the landscape of the NHL, the MLB, or professional sports in the US. And maybe that has some tie to, digital responses during the pandemic. Maybe it doesn't, but and I know you both have thought extensively about this issue. So let's start with Jonathan.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the good news. Or potential good news, depending, I guess, where you are on this topic. Sports betting in general, but more specifically, what's called prop betting. And prop betting, for those that don't know, is betting on small moments in a game as opposed to the eventual outcome. And particularly prop betting on mobile devices is likely to be the largest new source of revenue in sports over the next decade, if it isn't already in the places that it's legal. My guess is in 10 years, it'll be larger than sponsorships, larger than TV ad revenue. Some would say larger than two of those combined. I'm less thinking that, but it is where the growth will come from. In my particular case, it's not yet legal in California. And if I tried to predict the future, always a foolhardy thing to do to try to predict the future. But if I tried anyway, we're probably a minimum 2 election cycles away, and probably more likely 3 election cycles away before it comes to California. And so there are approximations for sports betting. There are free-to-play games where you're wagering fake money and you get prizes and boards of saying there are lottery versions as well. I think rules of the sport will evolve for betting. People are skeptical about that, but I point out that rules of sports evolved for TV over the years. Maybe baseball less so, because baseball hates to change their rules of their sports, but other sports have changed to make it more TV friendly. I suspect other sports will slowly change to make it more betting friendly as well. I'm less worried. I know some people are, about what it means for athletes and how that may impact their style of play and things like that. Obviously there are corner cases for all these things, but I think it's fantastic for the game if you have the mental model of how do you engage the person who isn't in your building. And I started with that earlier in this conversation. I think there are 100, 1,000 more fold potential fans. And one of the things, as a related way, is I'm trying to teach physics of hockey to people. And if you could, quote unquote, bet what would happen in the physics of hockey, which is separate from the game itself, it still gets another generation of fan interested in it, maybe a more technical fan, expands the sport. It's good for us as well. So in general, I'm positive. I just don't think we'll have the opportunity to take advantage of it in California for a while.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Yeah, the legal restrictions, right, often govern how much progress you can make in terms of innovation. Jake?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that hits very close to home for me. DC legalized sports betting 2019, I believe. And so I've personally been very involved and engaged in the industry, and we were very excited to announce our partnership with BetMGM in January. And for the first time, we're going to be opening a sports book right outside of our gates. We will have mobile betting on an app, on a state-of-the-art app that BetMGM will roll out for our fans inside of the ballpark, and then obviously our fans in Virginia and Maryland and everywhere else where sports betting is legal will be able to engage. I think from a Major League Baseball perspective, it's going to be very powerful for our industry. When you look at betting in Europe, which is a very mature betting market, about 70% of those bets are what they call in-play bets. That sort of gets along the lines of what Jonathan was talking about around prop betting. Baseball as a sport is very conducive to that type of gaming experience because it's a very relaxed, sort of slow pace of play, which, allows you to be able to set lines and offer different types of prop bets throughout the game. I'm very optimistic about how that new opportunity will allow our fans to engage with our product. I think you've seen what fantasy football has done for the NFL. I think you could see similar impacts through sports gaming on the other major sports. I think for us, it's going to be about choice, right? We recognize that not everybody is going to be interested in sports betting, and that's okay. We're certainly going to encourage our fans to do it in a very safe and responsible manner. But at the same time, we want to be able to, for the fans that are interested, create a very engaging experience that will allow them to sort of experience our product in a new way and potentially really engage in a completely different way than we ever have before. It's I think the opportunities are extremely significant, from a fan experience perspective, and then also from a business perspective.
And what's your take on Jonathan's statement about whether you think the rules of baseball might change in response to, the legalization of sports betting in DC? Do you think that baseball is likely to go that way?
Well, I mean, baseball has been very forward-thinking in its approach to sports gaming. Obviously we have multiple teams now with sports gaming deals, and so where the industry ends up moving as far as Jonathan's thought that we'll change the game so that we can better accommodate certain types of betting. I probably wouldn't comment on that, but I do know that we're being very forward thinking in how we leverage this opportunity to enhance our fan experience. It's, honestly, it's a way to not only reach our traditional demographic, but reach a very new demographic that, is interested in sort of the gamification of our sport. And, to Jonathan's point, the free-to-play apps that are out there, that's going to serve as sort of a great way to introduce people to this new experience, and then, do it in a safe way. And, if it's sports gaming, something that they're interested in, then they can move on and do that. But it's, I think Major League Baseball is actually being pretty forward thinking in how they're approaching sports gaming at the moment.
I'll jump back in and give you a middle ground, if you will, which is imagine a game where a fan has an opinion that a player made a mistake during the game, which fans do every single day, as I'm sure Jay could tell you as well. Well, what if immediately after the game you re-simulated it with whatever your favorite simulation but is, instead of taking that player in or out, you let the fan be in that situation and they make the decision, and maybe two fans then bet with each other about who could react to that, and then you just run that. That's not betting on the game, but it's betting on the game. It's in a digital world. For those of you with a tech background, you could build a digital twin. You could, alter whether the sun was in that person's eyes if you're outdoor. There's a whole bunch of things you can do, which is changing the game, but maybe not changing the game just yet, which may give us hints at how the actual game might change over time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. One that I've, sort of talked more philosophically about, but haven't actually, talked through the actual mechanics of how something like that would work. But yeah, certainly. I mean, that's an interesting common ground. I think that the bottom line is this is a totally new opportunity for our industry. I think there's, so many different ways for us to be able to take advantage of it. And, it's really exciting to sort of be in at the ground level and, partner with a great organization like BetMGM to be able to bring it to life.
That's great. And Jonathan, I'll be looking forward to that app once you create it. So let us know when it's live.
Fair enough. Is that you signing up to QA it for us?
I will turn things over now to the Q&A. We've had a lot of great questions come in from the community members who are here listening, and a couple that I promised that I would get to. The first is about, so both of you occupy positions, I think, that are have jobs that are the envy of many people. what advice would you give to someone who's looking to follow in your footsteps, who wants to break into the industry? And there's a specific question about someone who's maybe at a slightly later stage of their career transition, so even post MBA. What thoughts do you have there? Let's start with Jake first.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's journey is going to be different. Certainly Jonathan and I have a bit of a non-traditional journey into the industry. There are people that want to work in, come in and work from the ground up. I think that's one path. There are certainly people that have made the transition over. I think if you're looking to make the transition over, I think there's a couple of things. One, it's important that you network. Candidly, we get so many resumes whenever a job is open that sifting through those resumes is almost impossible. I personally find that I often narrow the candidate pool based on recommendations from people that I trust and value. And so, making sure that your networking is absolutely critical to be able to sort of differentiate yourself from the rest of the candidates. I think for more executive level positions, a lot of those positions are typically filled through executive recruiters. So building relationships with executive recruiters is important. One point on the networking though, that I want to highlight, because I'm sure Jonathan gets this as well. I'm constantly getting requests on LinkedIn or, through email to connect and, talk with somebody over coffee. Whenever I enter into, one of those conversations, one of the first things that I tell somebody is, hey, it's great that you're out networking. That's absolutely what you need to do. But it's important when you come to a networking conversation that you're coming with something interesting to say and not just coming with a handout for a job, because, the supply of jobs is relatively constrained in this industry. And it's important that you maintain that relationship after the initial conversation, even if you don't get the job. I can count on one hand the number of people that I've told, when you come to your networking conversation, come with something interesting to say, and then maintain that relationship afterwards. And to this day, like only a handful of people have ever done it. But the people that actually follow up with me and say, hey, I read the Sports Business Journal. It's really interesting. That sports betting deal that you did with BetMGM is really interesting. Have you ever thought about X, Y, and Z for engaging, the next generation in sports gaming? Like having an interesting thought that separates you from everybody else. And I can tell you that if I have an open position, it's the people that have stayed in contact with me and are bringing something to the table that I'm going to think about first when I'm, looking to hire for that position.
Jonathan, I'm sure you get approached quite a bit as well.
I do. I echo everything Jake said. I completely agree. And I think people misunderstand networking. And too many people think networking is asking for help. If you're a good networker, you're giving help first, whether you believe that is karma or giving to the, whatever your favorite phrase for that as well. I'll just tell you, there's a woman I've tried to hire 3 times in my career at 3 different companies. And each time she has come to the interview such that it is with a great idea. I've given her a job offer. She said, no, go someplace else. So you would think, to use a baseball metaphor, I've struck out. No, I'm still going to try to find, I haven't tried to hire her here at this organization yet, but people that know how to give before they get are fairly rare. And if you can differentiate yourself that way, you're already ahead of everybody else. And I don't think it matters if you're early stage or late stage in your career. In fact, I'm not a big fan of the phrase late stage, because if we're all lifetime learners, which I'm sure everybody associated with UVA is a lifetime learner, then the number one thing you should be doing is being insanely curious, doing the research, learning about as much as you can, as many different things you have, challenging yourself in your existing role. My mental model was always asking my boss for something I didn't know how to do, for something more. In the end of the day, we all know the phrase that people join good companies and quit bad bosses. I always tried to do the reverse. In other words, I joined good bosses, even if the company wasn't yet good, with the theory, not that I'm suggesting this isn't a good company, it's a current company, because you attach yourself to good people, even if the company is in a bad situation because of financial or the industry's out of favor, good people will rise that ship disproportionately. And so the strength of who you're around says who you are. I rarely interview people or even network with them unless somebody I know says you really ought to do that. And so you want to live everyone around you with a powerful impression. And if someone I know says, you really ought to talk to this person, then 99 times out of 100, I'll find some hours in the days to do it.
You know, an implication of what you both say is that that's true for people both looking to enter an industry and enter an organization, but it doesn't stop once you're in, right? In terms of the giving and the receiving of advice and help and ideas and that kind of thing. So yeah, networking doesn't stop, right?
Or how you leave. Because I often ask how a person left more than how they showed up, because people remember your exit more than they remember your entrance.
Absolutely. Primacy and recency effects, we call them.
Yep.
Certainly leave people on a high note. Absolutely. There's a lot of great questions coming in from those who are listening. A lot of them pertain to what the new normal is going to look like. In a sense, I think people are sort of asking you to predict the future. And so I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, recognizing you don't have a crystal ball, of course, but what is the new normal going to look like, reopening, that sort of thing, both in the MLB, the NHL, for the Nats and the Sharks? What are some of your thoughts there? Let's start with Jonathan, please.
Yeah, as I said, predicting the future is tough, but I'll give some general trends, which is, I think health and safety is going to index to one of the most important things in sports and entertainment, and it's going to be part of the brand. And those franchises and those teams that figure out health and safety in a way that people feel more comfortable with them are going to get fuller arenas, full ballpark, fuller stadiums more quickly. And the changes are going to be jarring at first. In the same way, and I hate to bring up negative things, but after 9/11, I remember people saying to me, there's no way we're going to sit through metal detectors to get back into arenas. And now we don't think twice about going through metal detectors to get in arenas. So there are going to be safety changes, whether it's hand sanitation or masks in certain areas, or changes in the way food is delivered so it's contactless as opposed to there's going to be less and less high touch things. And it's not necessarily all related to COVID, because frankly, this is all to do with flus and other diseases, but we just, as an industry, sort of ignored them in the past. This will no longer be ignored and part of what we actually do. And at some point, the new normal, if we rolled back 3 years, wouldn't feel very normal to us.
Yeah.
But the behavioral change will be so that it incrementally changes and we won't notice it quite much anymore. I think the biggest one for us is we've always had mobile delivery and stuff like that, but usage has been very low. I think in the last full season we had, so this is now 2 years ago, because last season was interrupted. And of course, this season doesn't have any spectators. Only 3% of our transactions were done with mobile ordering, even though we offer a discount and incentives. I suspect next season when fans are back in, it'll be more like 25%. And we have pre-order on your phone, pick up with no human involved. That'll probably go from, I think it was 0% when we introduced it. Nobody wanted to use the robot delivering stuff, to I suspect that will be high as well. We have now reverse ATMs in the building where you can convert your cash to an ATM card. That'll become popular. So these things seem weird now, but they'll just be regular at some point when we get to the next normal.
Jake?
Yeah. I think Jonathan summarized my thoughts on it very well. I think you're going to certainly the focus on health and safety, things that, probably were a bit jarring at the beginning of the pandemic that are now a bit, more generally accepted, like wearing masks and trying to socially distance, whenever you can. I think that'll just sort of be part of the culture moving forward. I think, trying to remove contact as much as possible is going to be a focus area, whether that's through mobile ordering or digital tickets. I think you'll see fans use less cash, to Jonathan's point, with your reverse ATMs. I think, being able to place an order on your phone or even order merchandise on your phone, I think that will sort of, further amplify the need to provide omni-channel solutions. And so, I think that will be the major change. I think I'm hoping there's a lot of pent-up demand for people to come back to the ballpark, when it's, when we're able to host fans again. And I think on some level, once we're all comfortable doing that, we'll go back to how we used to be a little bit, but I do think that some of those, key changes in digitization of our experience is going to be here with us to stay.
Maybe I'll just chime one more in. There are people predicting the end of the high five in sports, and I think that's silly.
I agree.
It take, a few months for everyone to get comfortable, but I think we're back to locking arms, hugging people when someone scores a goal or hits a home run or whatever. That part normal will come back, the human touch, but we'll just do it when we want to, as opposed to when we had to do it before. That's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's part of what makes our experience so great, right? It's a shared experience with friends and strangers and family members. And, I think people probably miss that. And once the world's in a place where that's, we're able to do that again, I think you'll see people, go back to enjoying the game with those around them.
It's so interesting you bring up the idea that, attending games, it's a shared experience, because you've also touched on the role of technology and digitization. There's a question from someone about the future of software and technology in pro sports, and specific areas where you see additional adoption in the near medium term. So wearables, vivid seats, AR, that kind of thing, VR. What kind of integration do you see there in the near term and the long term, particularly vis-a-vis like the in-stadium fan experience?
One that we've talked about a lot is AR, augmented reality. If I'm sitting in my seat and I hold up my phone and I can see Juan Soto's stats and everything around his head, or I can put my phone up to the Coke sign and it unlocks some unique piece of content or maybe some great discount. I think, we talked a lot about doing that. Certainly we're very focused on our virtual wallet and sort of integrating all of the different, experiences so that people can, have that one seamless experience when they come into the ballpark. We have a virtual currency that is eCash. Being able to use eCash at concessions, at retail, on my tickets, maybe it's with sports betting and integrating with some of our partners. I think that's a focus area for us. I think the virtual reality at this time, it's really more an activation, a fun thing that we can do with our corporate partners. But hey, maybe in the future, there's a virtual reality seat, where I can buy a season plan and I can sit and wear my virtual reality headset in my house and look around, and it looks like I'm in the seat that I'm, that I would have bought. So, I think there are endless applications. I think the introduction of 5G and 5G networks are going to be able to, allow us to really unlock our creative juices and come up with really effective ways to allow our fans to engage. If I show up to a game and my season ticket holder rep immediately pops up on my phone and welcomes me to the ballpark and answers my questions and tells me the fastest gate to enter into and where my favorite concession stands are, like that's sort of the experience of the future, the types of conversations that we've had, and technology is going to enable that.
So yeah, another fun topic that I could talk for way too long about. So I'll just hit on a bunch of quick things. One is the NHL recently reintroduced puck and player tracking. So we are doing wearables. There's a ton of data that's now available. For those of you who are old enough, you may remember the NHL, the late 90s, with that glowing puck on the screen, which was a terrible experiment. This is much better. And you can use it to see how fast people are skating or who's got the puck. If you can't, because we're a sport where it's moving so quickly, if you're not a fan of the sport, you may not recognize the player. So we can give, that's TV. Now we're starting to do that in the arena as well. But most people think about the consumption experience. They think of the sport, but it's changing everything. We already have algorithms that say, oh, we're going to run out of hot dog buns on this side of the concourse, but we have extra buns on the other side of the concourse. So let's just move them during the game, because you sell most of your stuff in hockey during the period breaks. It's unfortunately not like baseball where you can get up and go buy a beer or a hot dog and not probably miss too much action. I don't mean that negatively. It's great. And so we only have certain windows where we can actually deliver fan experiences without interrupting the game. And so optimizing those windows is something that we can do from an operational perspective, and redirecting fans to different gates on their mobile device, et cetera. some of that already exists. It'll just get better and better over time as it becomes, I like to say broadcast was treating everybody the same. Segmentation was typically driving it down to 10, 12, 14 groups. We're now getting into micro segmentation. I don't really believe the segment of one, frankly, that I used to say as a marketer. I think we're a long way away from segment of one, but we can get to segment of small, where you do look-alike kind of modeling, and that's already starting to happen. And the more you do that, the more you can then simulate these things, as I said, these digital twin worlds, to figure out, before you experiment on a real human being, you experiment on their digital twin, see what their reaction is, and go, oh, that was a really bad idea. And I will tell you, because of my tech background, I come up with lots of really bad ideas. And I wish I had a way to experiment without impacting the actual fan experience. And generating this simulation is starting to let me do that, because I'll have a better idea, not a perfect idea, of what works before trying it out on humans.
I think one other point, and just want to sort of stress this, the idea of one fan experience. You know, there are tons of companies out there with great ideas and great apps that are going to enhance the fan experience in some way. You know, it's difficult for us to think about driving our audience to like 20 different apps when you're sitting there, you know, watching the game to do 20 different things. But being able to have sort of one integrated platform and one integrated fan experience is a focal area for us right now. You know, where can we make sure that everything is flowing through our ballpark app? You know, we've got one virtual wallet that, you know, allows me to go buy concessions and, you know, buy and order retail to my seat or whatever it is. There's so many great ideas out there right now. It's just making sure that it's all unified. We're not sending our fans in 800 different directions when they come to the ballpark is really important.
Well said, Jake.
Yeah, being able to have a streamlined experience. Sometimes, you know, doing a lot, it ends up being too much, I can imagine. And with so many directions that you could potentially go in here, it's important to be able to curate and retain, I think, control of the fan experience. If you want it to be a good experience, I can imagine. So we are almost out of time. I want to say thank you to both of you for joining us today. I'm thrilled that we were able to host this insightful cross-grounds presentation for everyone. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise with all of us, and everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us and submitting such great questions for our panelists. If you're interested in watching this webinar again or sharing with friends, the recording will soon be available on the UVA Club's YouTube channel. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. This will conclude the webinar. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you, and go Who's.
So Who's.
Wow.